Welcome to today's Politics and Tactics. We got a great guest for you, and I'm sure I'm going to slaughter his name throughout. So Steve, can you just say phonetically how you spell your name?
Sure, Prziborowski. People get intimidated looking at it. You flip the I and the Z around, and flows like Prziborowski. And if not, whatever works, I'm good with.
I just call him Chief. It just works, or Super Steve. So we really appreciate you coming on the show today. And to introduce you to most of our listeners and viewers probably are well aware of you. You know, you're out at FDIC teaching every year. You're around the country. Today you're in Florida. Just this week you were in Virginia. You're all over the place. And I think that is great. You have a great book out, Courage Under Fire. It's lessons learned after getting your badge. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take a couple minutes here, and I'm just going to read the foreword to the book, but I'm not going to say your last name because it just doesn't work. Is that fair,
No,
Chief?
Totally fair. And it is not technically out just yet, but the final's there, and I was told it hopefully will be out by FDIC, so hopefully very soon. But thank you for the lead up there.
Terrific. It's definitely a book I'd recommend. I had the honor to write the foreword for the book, to get a first draft of it. And, you know, Chief Steve, he exemplifies command presence. He's calm, confident, and competent. In this manuscript, he passes on lessons to prompt you for success. These tactics will place you on the high ground where you'll be able to develop the vision and clarity to be effective in any leadership environment. Luckily, this book is easier to read and garner lessons from than pronounce Chief Steve's last name, because for whatever reason, I can't get it. But in all seriousness, being in command means that you will be responsible for others, your decisions, and responsible for your organization's mission and values. It's not just about you anymore. If you have children, think of the moment that you realize that you were responsible for somebody else. I know it happened to me when I was driving home after my son was born. He was at ICU. I was like, oh my God, I actually have to take care of somebody else. But it's that feeling that equates to the burden of command. And if you don't have kids, command usually doesn't get real until somebody under your command gets injured or hurt. Risk is inherent on this job, where as the boss, you will be tasked with attempting to make almost perfect decisions based off imperfect information. And when decisions have to be made, there is no way to pause, no way to call a timeout. At a fire, the hourglass will be nailed to the table, and the victims only have a finite amount of time to survive. Steve captures getting a good look at the problem, understanding consequences while still being aggressive. He comes to this reality by ensuring you understand the risks, aggressively train your crew, and minimize those risks while acknowledging they can never be eliminated. Death is a card in every firefighter's hand, a card that we will lay down to attempt to save a life, and yes, property before searches are confirmed. Only this is not blind dedication. We need to train, understand resource development and coordination, along with proper command and communication. Leadership under fire does not just take place on the scene of emergency, and this book will take us through 5 distinctive leadership types that Steve puts forward. Steve takes us on a journey of lessons that he learned after getting his badge, while stressing the need to prepare yourself for leadership by being a good follower. Now, Steve, this is something that's often missing from the leadership books. You need to have a vision and purpose. And if you're going to survive the pitfalls of command, you need to ensure that you're not part of the problem. Steve uses effective self-awareness and self-reflection to the point where back in the day when he would take shots from the recliner without the intent to change things for the better, his intent was to stir the pot. But instead of making excuses, he takes responsibility in hopes that you will not make the same mistakes. He covers how to be a constructive follower and how to ask the right questions without giving up the ability to have a little appropriate fun at work. And if you make one of his mistakes or a new one, recognize it, learn from it, and share it. Your credibility is the currency that will build your command presence and help you transform into a great leader. Steve draws from 30 years of progressive leadership experience while bringing in modern realities of our legal society, and realizations that you're always being watched and recorded. Think of the ring cameras at the next medical or fire you go. They're always recording you. Leaders have the most influence when they're making the hard decisions, when they're out front and the risks are high. This book will help better prepare you to ensure you have the right information so you can make the right call. Unfortunately, making decisions when everybody is watching is also where the real damage is done. Do you have the courage to do the right thing when it's not popular? Will you have the courage to challenge your organization on behalf of your members and then provide, and especially when they provide you with the ammunition to defend their actions? So to be clear, to clarify my jumbled reading there, is you always got to stick up for your personnel, but you need to make sure that your personnel give you the ammunition to defend their actions, that their actions are defendable. Coming to the right answer as a leader takes physical and political courage. Some will attempt to parse a distinction, failing to grasp that most firefighters would risk their life for a lost cause, but will not risk being ridiculed or the loss of esteem of standing up for what's right. It takes you applying the lessons in this book to better prepare you to be the adult in the room, to be the responsible party, the one who's willing to make yourself uncomfortable and grow. One of the biggest issues in the fire service is officers that don't see themselves as managers or leaders beyond the fire ground. Steve eloquently addresses the leadership crisis by providing tactics and lessons that can be applied to your next shift or emergency. Remember, if firefighters always did the right thing, we wouldn't need leaders or supervisors. Collateral damage of personality and those who will risk making their kids an orphan or their spouse a widow, they tend to have some self-destructive traits. It's just the fact we see in all of our fire departments. As a leader, we must be vigilant for the signs of when a team member is getting on the wrong track. Steve addresses how important it is to listen and take care of each other and covers valuing employee assistance programs. We're going to talk about employee assistance programs a little bit today, I'm sure. Use this book to better yourself and to help you focus on areas that you can improve, and better yet, purchase a copy as a gift or share it with one of your colleagues. It's been an honor to know Steve. He's a consummate professional who has demonstrated the ability to pass on information in a clear and concise way. It is telling that I met Steve not when he was lecturing, but when he was sitting in a class trying to pick up one or two things that could just make him a little bit better. He leads by example. Now, I know that my reading isn't great, but I wanted to set our viewers up to what kind of individual Steve is, because here at FDIC, instead of running around, you lecture in the class and then only other time you see somebody is in a bar or somewhere else, you'll find Steve attending a class. So on behalf of PJ, Norwood, and myself, Steve, welcome to the show. PJ, I'll let you start it off.
Thanks, Frank. That was a pretty good introduction. And Steve, congratulations on the book. I was unaware you were working on another book till Frank mentioned it to me. So congratulations. I know what a challenge that is to put all those thoughts actually down on paper and pass the test of the editors and the publishing process. It's not an easy chore. So congratulations. And I really look forward to picking up a copy of the FDIC. If it's half as good as your previous book, which I was prepared to talk about tonight, which we talked about, 101 Tips to Ace Your Promotional Exam, it's going to fly off the shelves. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, brother. And PJ, before I am remiss on this one, thank you for your contributions to that 101 Tips. I appreciate that. It was nice to have you, as well as the other 36 or 37 other contributors, FDIC speakers, fire engineering authors, fire service leaders and professionals contribute. I really didn't have a great relationship with Frank at that point, so that's why I didn't get him to be a part of that. But as time would allow me to do as time went on, and I had this next book under contract, Frank was kind enough to pen that very generous and very, very humbling forward. So thank you again, Frank, for that as well too. I appreciate it, brother. It means a lot.
Yeah, I actually expected him to say no, because the book is, tips to ace your promotional exam. And I totally spun it And what happens when you don't get the promotion? Right. So I didn't know if he was even going to agree to that. And reading the book, it's kind of a nice closeout to the book because you're building somebody up to help them get promoted. But as we all know, we're always not going to get the job that we want. So sometimes it's good to hear from that.
No, and thank you for that, because that was when I was putting together 101 tips. That was the suggestion I had from the Fire Engineering Books and Videos folks, that you've got a lot of great tips. Why don't you reach out and have like words of wisdom from other people? And I think that was probably the best decision I ever made, to have folks like yourself and the many others that are out there sharing some words of wisdom, page, 2 pages, 3, 4, 5. And I gave out those 101 tips, and I specifically targeted certain people to share their subject matter expertise, sort of like, as you can see throughout the book. I mean, there's command level stuff, there's administrative level stuff, but there was also that other point that I wanted to make sure is at the very end of it, is that it's not all Skittles and rainbows. That, sometimes we take a promotional exam, and, I got promoted in the first captain's test, but it took me twice in the battalion chief's test. When it came to deputy chief, it took me 4 times. So while it's nice to get the promotion, it's really your leadership book is the way I look at that book, because it's leadership advice. Because my number one tip is prepare for the position, not the test. Because if you prepare for the position, as well as the rank above, which is another tip, but prepare for the position, it shouldn't matter what they throw on the test. I hate it when people call me up or reach out, hey, Steve, can I get the answers for my whatever upcoming test? Like, okay, it don't work that way. I'll give you some tips and suggestions and a roadmap. You got to do the work. But I think what you did, PJ, was a perfect way to close it out, because I had some people like, hey, you didn't get the badge, but where do you go from here? So I think thank you for doing that, because I think it made total sense to try to have a soup to nuts type of book that, hey, not always sunshine, but sometimes what you do and how you handle that adversity is really defining your true character.
Absolutely. And people are looking at you when you don't get that. When you don't get that position, or when you fail to do anything in the fire service. So really you're setting yourself up for the future. And PJ, I think one of the great piece of advice is I've seen from the Wallingford Fire Department that was I thought was really good. Small department, 2 firehouses, individual takes a lieutenant's test, doesn't make it. He makes a meeting with the chief of department, not to complain. He just simply makes the meeting and says, I didn't make it this time, chief. What do I have to do for the next one to bring your vision forward to kind of make that impact needed so I can get to the next level? And they actually gave the individual good advice. He took the advice, and then the next test he got promoted. So I thought that was kind of a nice way to handle the disappointment. And then sometimes you could just make a Supreme Court case out of it. So,
but you got to be able to have all the different alternatives at hand, because there's always impacts to everything we do, and sometimes you got to go that route.
Absolutely. But PJ, I think that's, ask, if you don't get the job, ask why you didn't get the job and what you can do in the future. I think that's great advice. PJ, any more words of wisdom on your section in his book?
No, I just, I thank you, Steve, for the opportunity. I've had, 5 or 6 or 7 different opportunities to help contribute to different books along with writing my own. And I enjoy contributing to other books. I contributed a chapter in Frank's leadership book. It's a lot easier. Spend a couple hours here, a couple hours there, put something together, and you're done. Versus the months, sometimes years on end. So for those of you that are out there maybe thinking about writing a book, more power to you. I'd be happy to write a chapter for you, but it's not an easy feat. And if it's something you're interested in, usually FDIC, there's usually a session that's put on by Diane and the publishing folks to tell you what the process looks like and what the steps are. Because it's a very formalized and detailed process that Fire Engineering Books and Videos has outlined. So check into that, and I'd be more than happy to contribute for you.
Work smarter, not harder. You've done the hard work before, PJ, so it's not like you haven't. So yeah, Frank, sorry.
How'd you come up with, you said it was 101 promotional tips? How'd you come up with the 101? What was your process?
I was going back and forth. I had already self-published a promotional preparation book about 10 years ago, and I still had a lot of ideas in my head. And to me, I'm not necessarily a creative person, so I can put stuff on paper, but when it comes like maybe a cover, maybe a catchy title, I always struggle with that because I always want to, just have something catchy. somehow with all the different ideas I was throwing around, that number popped up. I can't remember maybe I saw the name 101 Dalmatians or something else, but it was trying to think of something catchy. We've all heard probably the term like, the Dummy's Guide to whatever, or Fishing 101, which I didn't want it that way. But then when I just figured, 101 tips is, seems unique. And at least when I threw it to the fire engineering publishing staff, they're like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's run with that. I was like, well, okay, well, good. I mean, thankfully I had 101 tips, but it's all good.
That's tremendous. Now, what about your new book? What was your process in your new book? Because what I liked about your book was I got the feeling as I was reading it that it was honest. Because I'll be just completely honest with you. Sometimes when you read a book, you're like, I bet you if I showed this to the people that worked with this individual, they'd be like, this is not the guy. And I think that your book kind of, you were humble in it. You basically threw some rocks at yourself and said the great things that you do and have accomplished as well. And I thought that was, it made it more interesting to read because it humanizes the author a little bit.
Well, thank you. Because I can't speak for what others would say. I'd like to think that would be the case and everything else. And I think leadership has always been a passion of mine. The promotional preparation I've always enjoyed, as well as the front end of it, getting people hired in the fire service. Then as I've been fortunate to rise through the ranks, obviously, once you have more time, more experience, then you can write about your passion. So I started doing the promotional preparation stuff because there wasn't really a lot of other stuff doing. I mean, Anthony Castros, who I've known for years. I mean, I was a paramedic intern at his fire department because I worked at the department just south in Elk Grove when he was still on the job, basically just off probation. So I've known him for years. And he's got an awesome book, Mastering the Fire Service Assessment Center. And when I had done my book, it's like, he's written the gold standard of that one. So the 101 tips is really sort of a compliment without, there's a lot of books out there on everything, but it was that way. Well, when it came to leadership, once I had the promotional preparation book done, I had already had a lot of thoughts for leadership stuff that I collected over the years. And I tried to categorize in different ways. And, about 10 years ago, someone asked me just the other day, how did I come up with courage under fire leadership? It's like, obviously I didn't necessarily coin the term. I mean, it's a term that's been out there, but about 10 years ago, trying to have something that was maybe different, because we all have a great message. We all share things probably that are the same meaning and the same best practices, but we all have our own flavor of doing things. So like the courage under fire leadership term just came as I didn't really see that term being used out there, but I really recognized as I went up through the ranks how much courage it took to be a leader, because I look back and I think how much I, for lack of a better term, sometimes probably sucked as a captain or even as a battalion chief, because I was too stuck in that buddy to boss mentality because I didn't want to piss people off. And I didn't, I worried about maybe, losing friends over the process of being a boss and everything else. And those all things realize now that it's like, it takes courage to be a leader. And there's a lot of things I could have done differently. So that's a lot of things I put in the book, as you had mentioned, just lessons learned over the years and things that I came across. So I think courage is one of the most important leadership traits. That's where this title came from.
PJ?
Yeah, and you can look at that one word of courage. It means so much, and we normally tend to think that it's, courageous to be a firefighter, to, run through the front door and save women and children. But sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is just have a conversation, and have that conversation with one of your subordinates, or have that conversation with your supervisor, your lieutenant, your captain, your battalion chief, your chief, not getting the promotion, walking to the chief's office, make an appointment, and ask why you didn't get that. So, courage, you can look at it comes in many, many different shapes and forms. And when you start looking at being a leader, I'd have to agree, and some of those hardest decisions you make come down to just having a little bit of courage and having those conversations. So I like that in the title of your book, and I appreciate your explanation of it as well.
And Chief Steve talks about in the book that you can't be everybody's friend, and there's a value in employee assistance programs. And you're not just, if you become a lieutenant or captain, you're not just the highest paid firefighter. If everybody did the right thing, there'd be no reason for officers. So if you're going to lead, you have to be responsible. You have to take responsibility for your actions, your crew responsibility. You got to take care of your crew. Do you want to speak a little to that?
Well, yeah, because just to go back to what PJ said before I get to that, the courageous running into burning buildings or hazardous situations, that to me, I think is the no-brainer that when we raise our hand to, take the oath of office, we recognize what we're getting into from the firefighting aspect of it, the emergency scene operation. The challenging part where I think it really takes courage is 9 out of 10 decisions that are made by officers and leaders are pretty much routine decisions. It's sometimes that 1 out of 10 that is going to cause some waves and everything else. So as you just mentioned of trying to tie that into your crew, I touched on a little bit earlier of how challenging I think the buddy to boss situation is from firefighter to company officer, but also company officer to battalion chief. It's one thing when you're going from maybe supervising a couple people in a firehouse on an engine or a ladder company, but now like a battalion chief, you're supervising usually multiple firehouses, multiple company officers. And I see a lot of folks around the country, like I mentioned, I was guilty of it even as a battalion chief, at least as a new one. Again, trying not to alienate people, trying to be everyone's buddy, and trying to, I guess, be nice, which is important. That's a great leadership trait. You got to be nice, got to be friendly. I mean, that's just playground rules 101 that we were all taught from a young age. But trying to now balance that with your crew to make sure that you're setting them up for success, but also making sure the mission is being met in the bigger picture. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in today's fire service, because I don't think it's any easier being a leader today than it was when we got on the job 30 years ago, give or take. More challenging in a lot of ways. Not to say it wasn't challenging back then, but I think just people challenges. A lot of people are quick to point fingers at certain generations. And I'll be the first to say, no, don't blame a current, whatever the generation, insert generation name here. Don't blame them. Blame the parents, blame the grandparents, but also blame society, because for all these things I think we're hearing about the younger folks who get a bad rap, it's just a society challenge. I saw someone post on Facebook the other day about how disheartening it was for them that people are not taking responsibility personally. They're playing the victim, and not to mention they're just not really, they're pointing the finger everywhere but themselves. And that's, to me, is why I think courage under fire is not just a leadership term for when you're supervising others, managing others, leading others, but also for ourselves. When we're looking at ourselves in the mirror every day, are we making the right decisions that are there in the best interest of the crew, best interest of the community, and everything else? And it doesn't get any easier, unfortunately, given all the public scrutiny or the other internal scrutiny. Sometimes like, why are we doing this? This is BS. We're a fire department. Well, yeah, but in the bigger picture, we need to be aware of this. So I think it's really challenging trying to walk that fine line. So especially as a company officer, battalion chief, you're stuck in the middle, and you got to support your crews, but you also got to support your bosses and the command staff. And sometimes when you support the command staff, it can be looked at as maybe drinking the Kool-Aid or looking out for the chiefs, when in all reality, you're looking out for the entire department, which is ultimately the community. And you just got to explain that hopefully well that people understand. They may not agree with it, but here's the challenge and the ownership that we take each time we go up a rank.
And you were talking about in the book, which I thought was kind of a neat term, is about setting that expectation early with your crew that, hey, if you do something, I'm going to back you up, but you have to give me the ammunition to back you up. So I think that setting that from the beginning is really wise.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And I was guilty of that, and you touched on it, being that recliner sniper. I got to give Chief Castro's credit for that term. So I think he's the first person I ever heard use the term recliner sniper, the one that sits, like I think most of us have been guilty of that, and take shots at everybody. If I was the fire chief, if I was the deputy chief, I'd be doing this. And it's like, oh, it ain't as easy as I thought it would be in their shoes. But setting the expectations, which is really, I guess, I hear the word leader's intent a lot, but that's sort of, I guess, the modern day terminology for expectations. But it's critical to set those expectations and let them know I got your back, but it's a two-way street. You got to have my back too, just like I got to have my boss's back, because I expect my boss to have my back. We don't have to necessarily be best friends and exchanging holiday cards and singing Kumbaya, but it's a relationship that hopefully we have a great working relationship, but we also got to have each other's backs. And how do you give ammunition, or how do you give bullets to your boss for the gun? Doing the right thing, taking care of the customers, hopefully doing things that are really focusing on the mission of the organization, which is serving the public and also taking care of our crew in the process.
PJ?
Yeah, Steve, you mentioned generational differences. Do you have anything in this, the new book you're coming out with, as far as the generational gaps and generational differences? Because that's one thing that always gets me. We're always so easy to complain about X generation or this generation. And a lot of times I find it just, well, one, if you're a leader, you shouldn't be complaining about those underneath you, for one. And two, the majority of the time I see it's usually not the generation, it's usually the person doing the complaining. Because when we were coming up, and we were all younger, they didn't like us, right? And that generation wasn't like the generation before. And as a leader, it's not our job to figure out if the generation or not sucks. It's our generation to figure out how to communicate with them, how to educate them, how to work, guide, and train and educate and keep them safe on the fireground. It's not to bitch and moan because you're not happy with their generation. So did you cover anything of that in your book?
Well, first of all, bingo and hallelujah on what you just shared. And yes, I do cover that in the book. It's it could be a whole book in itself, but I do cover that because I totally agree that when we got on the job, they were complaining about our age groups. Now, it wasn't related to, say, technology because that wasn't around. However, that's one of the main focuses now. 30, 40 years from now, they're going to be complaining to our kids, our grandkids, these kids, or they'll be complaining, these kids today, it'll just be, who knows what the issue is going to be. There's always going to be issues. But I think you hit the nail on the head, PJ, that it's Billy Goldfeder had sent something out in one of his close call emails a number of months ago. And it was basically like a little meme that said, if they suck, mentor them. If you don't mentor them, you suck. Because I think back to my comment made earlier about the Facebook post I saw, we play the victim very well in society. We generally, not obviously everybody exceptionally, there's always exceptions, but it's so easy to play the victim versus when you're pointing fingers. And I love having this conversation because I'll throw that question out when I teach classes is like, hey, let's talk about generations. And, there's usually people from 18 to 60 in any given class. And there'll always be that one or two people around my age group in their 50s that'll be like, these damn kids today, and blah, 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 blah. And of course, as I'll look around the room, I'll see the eyes rolling of the younger kids and other people, and I'll let them have their piece. And of course, it's a discussion point. And then, of course, usually I'll look at one of the younger folks, and they'll usually counter with something else. But my point is, which is your point also, leadership is not about moaning and groaning or bitching about things. It's about being a part of the solution, not part of the problem. And in the fire service today, maybe even if you work in a volunteer organization, you can easily find 3, 4, 5 generations of people. I mean, it was a friend of mine yesterday in North Carolina. His department has like 14 and 15-year-old junior firefighters, and then they transition to volunteers. But he goes, we got volunteers in our 70s. We've had them in the 80s in the past. So think about the different generational challenges. That really is leadership, is recognizing that, number one, whether it's adults or children, we all learn differently. We all are different people, especially today. And we've got to try our best to get to know people. And that's why I think a lot of people would rather point fingers, because leadership requires work. And if you don't agree with somebody, that's great, but you better get to know them first, and you better get to know how to connect with them and know their strengths or their weaknesses, so you can just not say, well, fire them because they're, as I used to hear a lot before I retired when I was training chief, we got to fire that kid. Let's get somebody else. It's like, okay, let's not fire the kid. They got an awesome positive attitude. Maybe they don't get it like you get it. 9 out of 10 people get it when you teach something, but maybe they're that 1 out of 10 that didn't get the way you taught them. So you know what? Just like any other adult, we all learn differently. So yeah, it's going to take time and effort. Maybe you've got to try different techniques and it's going to take you longer, but as long as they're got a positive attitude, they're not an asshole, they're not a jerk, and they play nicely in the sandbox with the other crew members, give them a shot. Doesn't mean they'll be successful. Maybe require a lot of work, but at least we got to give it a shot. But I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges moving forward as a leader, is trying to transcend those generational differences. And I remember Chief Bruno, God rest his soul, here's a guy that you could see him sitting down at FDIC, maybe talking to a 15-year-old junior firefighter who probably has no clue who the guy is, that he's in, one of many royalty situations that you get to when you're going to a place like FDIC. And then Bruno's talking to someone half his age, if not his age, if not older, but he didn't let that get in the way of his discussion. So I think that's the point that I try to at least talk about in certain points of the book. Just leadership is not about complaining. It's about trying to bridge those gaps and make the best of things. And no, not everyone's perfect like we are. I say that sarcastically, but sometimes we get on our high horse saying, well, they're not like me. Well, yeah, they're not. And so is a heck of a lot of other people.
I'm glad they were not like me.
PJ talks a lot about having, those courageous conversations, but a lot of it is you just need to have the conversation. I look back when I was at TENS with Chief Bobby Gahuli, you didn't have your cell phone at the table. That wasn't allowed. And he didn't check his cell phone either. So you knew that if you were eating dinner, everybody had to talk to each other. And you knew that if you went downstairs in front of the bay and you were going to sit in front of the bay and talk to the neighbors as they were walking by, there were no cell phones. If you wanted to go on your cell phone, you didn't come downstairs. So by putting those expectations, it gets everybody talking. And one of the things that I wanted to point out for, I'm sure we have a lot of company officers here, is the fire department a lot of times get mentoring wrong. If you're the company officer and you have that superstar on your shift, they need to be checked in on, and so that they can grow. But if you're the company officer as a supervisor, your real mission is to mentor the individual on your shift that's in the margins to see where you can get that individual to grow. Outside of your shift, if you want to pick a superstar to try to help them get to the next level, that's one thing. But on your shift, your main focus should be on somebody in the margins. PJ, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Like Steve mentioned, leadership is work. So sometimes we'll spend a lot of time on the A player because it's the easiest. And we forget about the player that's fallen below the bar in hopes that the A player takes the one that's fallen below the bar and helps that individual out. So I don't know if I focused on the mediocre one versus the one that was less than mediocre. You know what I mean? And try to build that team together. But it's a balance. It comes down to knowing the personality sometimes. Sometimes you have to go after that middle ground versus that lower one to pull them together. Sometimes you have to use the senior man. And sometimes you just got to say, they may not be right for you. So let's find somebody else that can communicate with them. Because we can't communicate to everybody effectively. You know what I mean? There's so many different personalities out there. We have to do our best to try to figure out how to communicate to them effectively. But sometimes you might need a mediator or somebody else to deliver a message for you to help bridge that gap.
I think that's well said. But I also think that a lot of officers, you have to have that communication because the answer is never to ignore the person. And we do that in the fire service. The people that do great, we ask them to do more. The people that do nothing, they ignore. Steve, you want to speak to that?
Well, I think we had many of those conversations in our weekly command staff meetings about something needs to get done. Hey, let's go have Captain so-and-so or firefighter so-and-so. And of course, someone's texting that firefighter. And, I'll do it, Chief. I'll be happy to. And it was great. We rewarded our rock stars, probably maybe some ways burning them out, but they would never say that. But then there has to be that balance though, too, so we don't burn them out. But it's not just burning the rock stars out. It's also trying to get those other ones that might be on the fringes because they just may not be willing enough to step up or raise their hand. And sometimes it takes that nudge. I know some of the best things that I ever did in my career were not because maybe I chose to do them, meaning I raised my hand or submitted for it, is because one of my mentors, maybe not direct mentor, but indirect mentor that just happened to come across a conversation. Hey, Steve, did you think about this? Yeah, maybe I did, or I didn't know that. You probably should consider that. Well, I'm pretty good here. Well, you know what? Take that. So it's amazing. Sometimes I look back at some of the things that I was inspired by others to do that I probably wouldn't have had the courage just to do on my own for whatever reason, fear of failure, or I don't know, maybe it's taken on too much. But I think it is a balance. But it is our jobs at every rank to be able to tap those people on the shoulder, support the rock stars, keep them involved so we don't disenfranchise them. Because then especially they can be disenfranchised when we don't spend the time with those others that may be on the fringes that maybe are marginally performing or maybe even not even performing. Because it's sometimes, like you said, it can be tough to have to deal with them. It's easier and more fun to deal with the people that you enjoy hanging out with that are getting the job done versus those others. But I think those best officers are those ones that can strike that balance. And I wish I had a solution for that, but it takes time and effort.
No, it takes time and it takes effort and it takes knowing your personnel. And every fire department in America has a house of no firefighters, no house fun, no catch up. I mean, no TV. So, don't ignore them when they go to the fire as a chief.
Right.
That's not the company that you're going to look and give that order when things are looking bad to say, get in there and put out the fire or get the line to the third floor. But give them an order. I want a ladder on the outside. Let them complete that. I want a ladder on the Bravo side. Give them a task and hold them accountable to it. You actually build that company instead of just putting aside. PJ?
I agree. And we can go back and forth on this all day, and we could probably give plenty of examples. The fire ground is the easiest place, in my opinion, to be a leader, right? Because we work our careers. We start out at Proby School, we work our way up, and now it's your time. And I just was talking to a lieutenant this weekend at the academy, and he says, I finally caught my first fire. I said, how'd it go? He goes, it was actually a lot easier than I thought. I said, yes, that's what you've prepared for, you've trained for, you've practiced for. I said, how's it going in the firehouse on shift? He goes, yeah, I'm doing what I could, because we don't prepare them for that. We spend all of our focus on preparing them for the fire ground, even in our certification programs. What are they built on? NFPA standards and simulations and fire grounds, but we don't spend a lot of time on helping them have those courageous conversations, helping them manage the firehouse politics, helping them determine what battles to fight with amongst the shifts and what to let the shifts fight on their own. So I think we fail there more on not mentoring and training our next leaders to deal with the firehouse.
And I totally agree. And that's been my motivation, my inspiration, my passion for doing what I'm fortunate to do, whether it's writing, speaking, or whatever else. Because, I'm not the guy from FDNY that has fought thousands of fires and with all that stuff. That's great. We have plenty of those people out there from departments that fight fire and can talk about those things, which are very important. It's still very important. There's a reason we're called the fire department. But like in my department, for example, fires were 5% of our call volume, 20,000 calls a year for 15 firehouses, not a busy system. I mean, multi-million-dollar homes, wealthy areas, Apple Computer, all the Silicon Valley stuff, 1% actual fires. So we still got to train for them. They're still going to be there. And it's almost more important to train for the fires because the complacency that can set in because things don't happen that often. But then if you really think about it, like you said, even though fires are still a small chunk of our job, the people are the majority of our job, whether it's not just on the emergency scene, but at the firehouse, making sure we're ready to go, just whatever conversations that we have. And I think that's why one of the inspirations I had is I didn't see a lot of folks necessarily targeting that type of stuff. It's not the most sexy, fun stuff, like talking about whatever strategy and tactics and command, which I can talk about, but I think there's more of a need, like you said, to try to really get, especially the company officers who are getting up there in that position to, you better be able to manage an incident scene, fire, keep people safe, solve the problems that are in front of you, but also make sure that you're taking care of your crew. And sometimes that's by providing the mentoring and all that preparation for whatever it is, having conversations, whatever critical thinking, situational awareness, and the ability to play nicely in the sandbox so you don't get in trouble from any outside influences like HR or whatever else, which unfortunately is happening on a daily basis around the country, just not by bad intentions, not by people wanting to screw things up, but they think, well, I can get away with what we used to be able to do 20, 30 years ago. Well, not really in most places.
Well, and part of that communication as an officer is you don't have to get into a discussion over every issue and try to win every issue. And you're not everybody's friend at the table. I mean, each rank, it's been long said, gives you one step farther away from the table. It took me a long time because I want to debate everybody. It took me a long time to just learn to shut up. And it actually, I had somebody who used to call and complain to me for like a half hour when I was union president all the time. And I used to debate the person. And it would end up being an hour and a half phone call every time I talked to them. And then I was reading a book, a biography of George Washington, and it said when he disagreed with somebody, if it wasn't a conversation of substance where something was going to be changed out of the conversation, he would just listen and ask questions. And I started taking that on, and that person who hated me all of a sudden became a supporter, and I never changed anything. I just listened. So I think that a lot of times we're so used to, when you become an officer, of giving directions, you go to the kitchen table and you get yourself in trouble because once you get promoted, you're not part of the rumor mill anymore. Sit there and listen. Ask questions to find the issues, but you don't have to take a position on every single thing that comes across the table. PJ?
And that's hard. I still catch myself some days doing that, right? It's easy to get sucked in. It's very easy to comment. It's very easy to offer your opinion. It's very easy to say, hey, what about this? Or sometimes it's better just to walk away and let them figure it out themselves because they're capable. Most times if they're not capable, it means you're not doing your job the rest of the day, right? Let them sometimes work through the problems on their own.
Well, I think that's something that took me a long time to learn because I think getting promoted to company officer, I naively had that my expectation was I got to know almost everything and I got to be able to have the answers when people come to me. I got to be able to give them advice, whatever else. And it took a long time of hard knocks before I realized that when people come to you, sometimes they may want advice. Sometimes they may just want a vent. And that was one of the best things I learned over the years of when someone came in and I knew it was going to be sometimes a half hour, 15-minute discussion, like you said, and then I didn't want to make it an hour and a half. It's like, hey, how can I best help you? Before we get started, is this just a vent session? You want to bitch and complain? I'm good with that as long as you don't make it me personally, but do you want my advice? Because it took me a while as well to learn that human beings, which I should have figured out years ago, usually don't want advice. They don't want unsolicited advice. And sometimes even when they want advice, they don't want to hear what you have to say to them. But I think Frank had something. I remember when I was reading your book, Frank, and it's been a while, so I can't remember the exact details, but I remember that stuck out too, of you making that comment about debating people. And then one of the situations, if I remember correctly, you would just pretty much just listen to them, hear them out, then okay. And then it was like, and I'm like, holy shit, that makes, but to me, that's a good leader, good officer, and sometimes probably a good parent as well. Bonnie and I don't have any kids after being married 25 years, but there's another probably good tactic of just trying to recognize where your place is, I guess. And again, that sometimes just comes from school of hard knocks and learning from experience and wondering, why am I wasting an hour and a half here when I could probably could be less, and it's not wasting time.
And you don't want to diminish the command of your junior officer, especially if you're a battalion chief. I always like the rule is 2 ranks down, 1 rank up.
Okay.
So as in for conversation. So if you're a battalion chief, the only people you should be having substantive conversations with are your lieutenants and captains and the 1 rank up, or if you're in a meeting with the chief. But that at least keeps you at the table asking about somebody's kids, what they do, things of that nature. But when it comes to having a problem, you shouldn't be addressing a lieutenant or a captain's firefighters, because you're going to diminish that lieutenant or captain. If you see a problem as a battalion chief, you got to bring it to the lieutenant. But also expectations have to be, and your book kind of talks about this too, I think, is that expectations got to be set to your firefighters, but also to the chiefs above you. They got to know that, hey, if you have an issue with one of my firefighters, you need to come see me, not go to the firefighter. So as the boss, why don't you speak on that? You got to set the expectations up and down, not just for your subordinates.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think that's one thing I learned early on as one of our former fire chiefs, a great people person. He was the one that the firefighter's firefighter. I mean, everybody loved him. Not saying they don't love the others, but they really liked him because it was just his charisma, his personality. He was very approachable, and he had a lot of awesome relationships working his way up the ranks, So it was one of those guys when he got to that position. I mean, and I don't think anyone was against having him in that position. The open door policy sometimes can come back and bite him because, say, like if I was the battalion chief in charge of PPE and maybe my budget didn't allow for buying whatever this time because it got maybe denied, or I got to prepare for the next budget cycle, and I maybe had to tell a firefighter, well, no, we can't get whatever this cycle. I got to wait till next year because it was, well, then you get the firefighter, well, the chief has an open door policy. And the chief go to the chief, hey, chief, what are your thoughts on leather helmets? Oh, I think leather helmets are cool. And it took me a while. And then finally it's like the chief, and then of course the guy would come back, well, the chief says we're going to buy leather helmets. Well, the chief needs to give me the budget money because we didn't have the budget money. I like him too, but I got to have the budget money, and then now it put me in a precarious position. And of course I'd walk in the chief's office and he's like, oh, and of course he didn't mean that on purpose, but then he recognized that and after a little while he was like, okay, when people come in, he knew when it crossed the line. He's like, okay, did you have the conversation, say, with Chief Prziborowski in that one? Well, yeah. What did he say? Well, no, but no, why? No, because of whatever. And I mean, it's a wide generation that people complain about. I got no problem with that because it's, to me, mentoring people. If you understand that, no, I like leather helmets, but the reason we can't go there right now is because of this, whatever the issue is, politics, safety, timing, budget, whatever. You don't have to agree with it, but at least that's why. But then, especially when, like you said, the 2 below, 1 above, it, as a command staff, that actually helped us because we all got on the better page of just recognizing that because we saw those things that happened. But that's so critical to have the conversations below, but also with above, not to be disrespectful, but just to make sure that we're all following the chain of command and we're not undermining the chain of command, and we're all communicating, which is sometimes the most challenging thing.
Yeah, and ideally, yeah, you want to have those conversations when there is no stress to have those conversations.
Yes.
Not if something happens. PJ?
You know, and I just had that conversation, a similar conversation last week. So at the Fire Academy now, I'm very visible to the recruits. You know, I'm out in the training ground almost every day, watching the skill stations, watching the instructors, looking at PT. So it's common that the recruits will come up and ask me a question. And I always ask, did you ask your squad leader? Have you gone through the coordinator yet? So when they came in on the 2 weeks ago started, I told them, so I'm going to be visible. You're going to want to ask me questions, and you can ask me anything you want, and I'm here to support you and help you. But if you ask me a question, I'm probably going to ask you if you've asked your squad leader yet, and if it's going up to the coordinators. And if you say no, I'm probably not going to give you an answer unless it's something that you need to talk with me because it's personal. You're having a problem. It's an emergent. That stuff I'll deal with you right away. But otherwise, if you come to me with a question, you probably should start saying, hey, I talked to my squad leader, I talked to the platoon leader, I talked to the coordinator. Nobody has a clue. And I'll probably say, well, then I'm not going to have an answer either, but we'll figure it out. But it's important. I think that's part of building, at least in the recruit program, the chain of command, but also building those squad leaders and the platoon leader and putting the onus on the coordinators so I don't get involved in their program. That's their program to run.
Yeah.
And if I start entering my opinion into answering the day-to-day stuff, I'm undermining their ability. That's the same thing if they're, battalion chiefs. If you're bypassing the battalion chief and the chief is giving the answer, you're undermining the authority of that battalion chief or that captain, whatever rank you want to talk about below that.
Well, it's almost like people. It's almost like someone joked one day, shopping for answers. Because mom doesn't give you the answer you want to hear, so then you go to dad. Dad's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" Then next thing you know, I didn't realize mom said no. It's like, and I think it takes courage just to be able to, especially when you are in that leadership position, whether you're the academy head of the academy, a fire chief. Most people in those positions obviously understand without a doubt all the different components of leadership, and they want to be that servant leader most of the time. They want to empower people. They want to take care of people. And especially as a fire chief, sometimes it's very easy to just want to, say yes to everything, why piss off anybody, but there's that challenging part of recognizing when you're going, okay, I better make sure that has this been vetted out, or do I need to just stop right here? Because that's part of the mentoring process too, but it's also, I think, good to be visible and approachable as well too. But the hardest part, just setting those boundaries and just making sure that things get stopped before they get out of control versus just I'm sorry, I didn't, it happens.
You mentioned right there about servant leadership, and me and PJ go back and forth about this a little bit, but for an example, so somebody asked me once at TENS, they said, I noticed that when you get up from the table, someone always washes your dish. And I said, yeah, that's because when I was a firefighter, I never let an officer wash their dish. I said, that's why that is. And, a lot of Dave Polikoff says all the time, I get up and I wash my own dish. I said, yeah, you should get up and wash your own dish. But if somebody takes it from you, you should say thank you. And you should make sure that you're not cheap, and you should pay for your dinner, especially if you have rank or a position of esteem. I don't even care if you're invited to dinner at a firehouse. If you go there as a chief officer, you better pay for your dinner or bring a dessert, throw $20 on and leave it, because you can't afford to look cheap. But I'm okay with, if you get up and somebody wants to wash your dish, say, no, I got it. Oh, no, I'll get it, chief. Okay, let them do it. You don't want to diminish your own command. Thoughts on that?
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because nothing is absolute in life. There's got to be exceptions. And I think this is one of the challenges we have when we put people in company officer and chief officer positions, is that gray area reality. Because think about it, as a firefighter, you're taught black and white, SOPs, SOGs, whatever they're called, policies, protocols. I was asking a firefighter once, a company officer, excuse me, about why didn't you go inside that burning building to attack the fire? Why did you wait for 2 in, 2 out? And the captain is like, well, Chief, we've got a policy. It says, I got to have 2 in, 2 out unless there's emergency rescue activities and blah, blah. So, and that's what we do. That's what we train on. I'm like, yeah, but we sent a full first alarm assignment to the report of a house on fire. I think that qualifies as emergency rescue activities. Just based on that. I mean, maybe I'm looking at things too big picture. And he's like, well, Chief, I don't want to get in trouble, And I'm like, when's the last time anyone's got in trouble? All you got to do after the fact is just write the exception report to the fire chief. I made the decision to forego 2 in, 2 out because I believe there was a chance that somebody was inside that environment that was blah, blah, blah. Whatever your justification was. And then the guy goes, well, Chief, you're expecting us to operate in the gray area. I go, yeah, that's unfortunately as an officer. He goes, but think back to when we got hired as firefighters, went through EMT or paramedic school. What's the first thing we taught? Scene safety, BSI, don't touch a patient. That's pretty black and white. Well, now we're officers. We're yeah, that's the way it works, unfortunately is. But hopefully departments are not putting people in trouble. I know that I heard of one exception recently where a big city fire department, somebody was disciplined for going outside along with those lines to go inside to initiate a rescue. But it sounds like that was an individual personnel / retaliation issue. But there you go, as a company officer, especially, you've got to operate in that gray area. And most of the time it's pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of times you're going to have to make that call, sometimes in a split second. And hopefully it's the right thing. If it's not, you own the decision and you move on and you learn from it and we share it with others. But I got down a rabbit hole too much. What was the other part of that, Frank? I just want to make sure I covered your question.
I don't know. I thought that was great. So we're just going steam ahead with that. PJ, weigh in on that.
Yeah. So what I always told my guys is make a decision, right? Make a decision. Yeah. I'd rather have you make a wrong decision than stand there and not make no decision. If it was wrong, we'll change course. We'll figure it out. We'll learn from it and we'll move on. But don't just stand there and not make a decision. There's nothing that pisses me off more, just that indecisive person. Well, maybe this, maybe that. Well, let's wait for somebody else. No, make a decision and then we'll fix it. Or we'll say, hey, great job. That was the right decision.
And just to add one more thing to that, if you're going to make that decision, you want to make that decision. What you think is right is wrong if you didn't go through command. So at least make the decision, but tell somebody what you're doing. And I'll give you a quick example. You pull up on an engine company, somebody's in peril, they're on the second floor, they got fire and smoke behind them. You may decide that, okay, my SOP says I'm going to stretch the line, but circumstances dictate action. I'm going to make the grab first. Well, that's okay. But you got to tell somebody you're doing that so you can be replaced on the assignment. So even though you may make the rescue, it's wrong if you didn't tell everybody what you're doing. So that communication part has to be there. Steve?
Oh, I totally agree. And it's, I'll use the example where in class, like what's the most challenging position on the fire ground? It's the company or fire ground / firehouse company officer, because you just went from that firefighter task level position or engineer task level to now company officer where you're tactical, but also strategic thinking to a certain degree until your battalion chief gets there. And it requires a lot of empowerment. I mean, leadership, one of the many words of leadership is empowerment, but with empowerment comes obviously responsibility, accountability. And I think that almost scares away some people, as people want to be empowered, but then they're like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble for it. And they get wishy-washy, sort of like what PJ said, like during promotional exams. So tell us how you'd handle the situation. Well, I think I might do this. You think you might do this. I love that. Versus this is what I'm going to do. Not cocky, not arrogant. But the key is, again, it's a major area I think all departments are dealing with, is getting company officers to understand that they work in a black and white protocol-driven environment, but they're going to always have to function in that gray environment that requires common sense, which isn't always common. We understand, but that's okay. That's why we have a team, and we have leadership. But we got to have communication, and a lot of interesting stories we can all probably tell along the years of those things. But it's nobody goes into this job wanting to do something wrong and make a mistake. And I think, unfortunately, there's some systems that don't encourage enough empowerment and don't encourage enough risk taking. and there's that fear of getting in trouble for it. And then we get a lot of sometimes indecisive personnel, especially at leadership positions. Well, I don't make decisions. Like, well, what do you want? I mean, you're here, make a decision. What's the worst that could happen?
And I think you talked about it earlier, and we're getting near the witching hour here, but I mentioned it in your forward, so I want to make sure that we cover it a little bit. Is, especially when the officer's a friend, one of the tough and most courageous decisions you can make as an officer is that supervisor referral or getting that individual to go to EAP, because it's never as black and white as we would like to pretend it is. The person is never. I've yet to see somebody where they agree with you and say, oh yeah, I'm having a problem. Today's the day I hit rock bottom and I want to turn around. I've never seen anybody have that. I mean, I worked in a city. I've never seen anybody that you to send for help or get help where they said, when it comes to drugs or alcohol, where they said that they have a problem. PTSD stuff, I have seen people where they say, hey, I need help. And when I had that blind spot on PTSD, I would always call PJ, and PJ would come into the city and help our guys out. And he did a great job. So do you want to talk a little bit about employee assistance programs and the officer's role on making that tough decision?
I remember one situation we had where somebody had a challenge with alcohol and drugs. And it was a lesson learned to me that it was just like you said, by the time they accepted the help, it was too late in the process of where they were at with the challenges they were having. And I remember talking to the person's officer, after this person unfortunately is no longer with the department. Person senses getting the help they need. Ran into that person, a few years ago, but they're no longer obviously employed. They got a good job, not as good as what they had. But I remember talking to the officer, and I made a comment, something like, "You're a pretty damn good paramedic." I know the guy very well, and it's like, "You're a pretty damn good paramedic, aren't you?" He's like, "No, Chief, I'm good, humble. No, you're a good paramedic. Whatever, I go, "You can't tell me you didn't see signs and symptoms of this over the, time." And he goes, "Oh, Chief," he goes, "hell, I could probably throw out at least 5 or 10 times over, working with this guy that I probably saw or our other coworkers did." And I'm like, dude, we could have maybe gotten him the help he needed sooner, because he was obviously not owning up to the challenges that he was having, which is, like you said, most of the time for fear of whatever, losing a job or fear of whatever. And I go, why didn't you say something? And he goes, because I just didn't want to be that guy. Because that's what, to me, courage under fire is raising your hand, which means usually I got the floor, or can I ask the floor, and I got to say something to that individual who needs to hear it, even though they don't want to hear it. But maybe you have to be that one that helps save someone from themselves. And you mentioned the term in the forward that I use, prompt for success. Sometimes we need that other person to prompt us for success, even though we don't agree. And back to this captain, I go, why didn't you say something earlier? Because we maybe could have got him earlier. Because I didn't want to be that guy. He goes, first of all, be that guy, because everyone's looking at me going, oh my God. And he goes, plus I didn't want to be wrong. Because there's always the chance, am I wrong? Am I right? 50-50 chance. And I go, well, if you were right, we could have maybe gotten this individual help a lot sooner, blah, blah. And he goes, yeah, I know. I just didn't want to be wrong. I totally get it. And again, there's that challenge with having that courage under fire to raise your hand, which could be doesn't even have to be a leadership position. Because I use the phrase, just because you're a firefighter or engineer doesn't mean you're not a leader. Maybe not by rank in your job description, but everyone in the organization has leadership potential. Obviously, some have responsibility. And I think that's that gut that I try to share with people, is that sometimes we don't want to maybe point someone in that position of, okay, I can't force you to go at EAP, but I'm really strongly as a brother, sister, encouraging you to go down that path, because oh no, I'm good. Because here's the challenge, to me, courage under fire is being on your deathbed, life flashing in front of your eyes, and hopefully you can go, you know what, I did the right things for the right reasons. Hopefully, yeah, I made mistakes, but hopefully I didn't keep my mouth shut and some bad consequences happen to somebody, maybe a line of duty death, maybe an injury, maybe an EAP issue, maybe just a disciplinary issue that I should have probably said, hey, let's not go there. Let's stop, or let's stop the brakes. We need to go down this path. And, you can hate me for the rest of my life, but you know what? We're going to we're going down this path right now. Sometimes it may be against their will, and there's consequences there too, because I've seen people sent to drug testing that were clean, and I see the ramifications of that when they're clean, because, hey, I'm clean now, and then of course everybody, you had an out for Joe. No, I was looking out because they were meeting the criteria based on, whatever random drug testing. But then I've also seen where they go, and then guess what? They are found. And the whole goal is to not have the gotcha moment, and the whole goal is not to have disciplinary action. The whole goal is to try to get people the help they need. I mean, I share when people go, what's your vision? My vision is, simply put, or my mission, I like helping people get hired and stay hired, get promoted and stay promoted, meaning not everyone needs to get promoted. Not everyone should get promoted, but be the best damn firefighter you can be, or engineer, or whatever rank you are. But when I say stay hired, that means obviously keep yourself employed, don't get yourself in trouble, take care of your brothers and sisters, but then also have a nice, long, healthy retirement. So that's why all this stuff sort of, to me, ties together, because when I talk a lot about career or life-altering events, which are not just line of duty deaths or accidents or injuries, but they're also sometimes poor customer service or citizens that maybe died because we weren't aggressive enough. All these things got tied together. But to try to close this out with the EAP issue, that I think is probably one of the most courageous conversations any officer will have, because your gut's probably telling you that, you know what, I better pull the trigger on this one, which may just mean phoning a friend, meaning phoning, if you're a company officer, the chief officer, and chief, I mean, every time, which thankfully was not a lot, but the few times when I was a deputy chief or a battalion chief and I had a captain or a battalion chief reach up and say, Chief, I don't know if this person meets the need to maybe go for random testing or whatever else. I got the policy. There's like 12 bullet items. Well, how many they meet? Well, they meet like 4 or 5 of them. I could maybe push for 6. I go, what's your gut telling you? Well, we should probably, well, then you know what? If that's what your gut's telling you, it's not an absolute. And again, there's always consequences of you're screwing the brotherhood because you're not having their back. Well, no, truly having the brothers and sisters' backs is trying to help them, help each of us, because I would hope someone would do that for me. Maybe I wouldn't like it at the time because of the consequences, but you know what? That's what I think we should all be doing a better job of. And I think that's why it's a challenge in today's world, because it is so complex.
I think you're 100%
if it was easy,
right.
everyone would be doing it.
I think you're 100% right. And I mean, you want to start that fire, you want to stop that fire while it's in the incipient phase, not when it's a 3-alarm fire and they already lost their house and they're going to lose everything else. Because I've seen plenty of people that got help that came back as the most valuable player. And I've also seen people where it was ignored, where one died for a stroke in the firehouse and another one years later had a heroin. So PJ and I have both seen it. PJ really has helped out the New Haven Fire Department over the years. I remember one time being a firefighter and walking into the watch booth when I first got to New Haven, and the officer was drinking a beer. And I said, "Hey, Lou, what are you doing?" And he said, "You'd have to be crazy to go into a fire sober." I was like, "Oh, okay. Welcome to New Haven." but the culture has changed. The culture has changed over the years, and PJ has actually been a huge part of changing the culture and getting people the help they need. And it doesn't work all the time. You can get people help, and that could fail too. But at least we try to get them back. PJ, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we'll have Steve the last word. Just wrap it up. This, as always, is great conversation on politics and tactics, and it's an honor having Chief Steve on. And I hope that everybody checks out his book at FDIC this year, and his books, I should say. Go ahead, PJ.
Thanks, Frank. And just want to remind everybody, we have 49 days until FDIC. It's right around the corner. Steve's teaching on Tuesday, pre-conference workshop 8 to 12. We got Frank up on Tuesday, pre-conference 1:30 to 5:30, in a classroom this year at 1:30. And then I can end the week for you at 10:30 on Thursday. So if you're interested, check us out. But attending FDIC is the hardest part, is choosing your classes. So choose something that's appropriate for you. And if you're with somebody else, divide and conquer. Don't go sit in a class with your best friend. Let that best friend go to another class and then share the information amongst the two of you. So this is a great conversation, Steve. As always, it's great. Don't forget 101 tips. I don't have Courage Under Fire yet, so can't put that up. 101 tips to ace your promotional exam.
You'll get one, yes.
Great book.
Nobody has one yet.
And don't wait until you're trying. And don't wait until you're trying to get promoted. Start reading it ahead of time. When you think you're going to get promoted a year or so down the road, start preparing today. So, Frank, thanks as always for allowing me to do He's with you, Steve. Thanks. Look forward to seeing you both in Indianapolis in 49 days.
Steve, thanks, PJ.
Man.
PJ, Steve,
Thank
last
you.
word.
No, thanks to both of you for allowing me the opportunity to be on here and spend the last hour or so hanging out and talking shop. Obviously, can't wait for FDIC. So exciting to be there every year as I've been since, God, I can't remember when. It's been so much fun over the years. But definitely, like you said, PJ, lots of great stuff to choose from, divide and conquer. But take the time. Feel free to reach out. Thank you. Thank everyone on the fire engineering team, the FDIC team, for the opportunity to continue sharing my passions, both in writing and obviously in voice. And if anyone wants to ever reach out, my website is simply Code 3 Fire Training. That's code3firetraining.com. Easier than probably trying to Google my name. Just code3firetraining.com. My cell phone, my email address are on there. There's a lot of free resources on there related to leadership, officer development, promotional preparation, as well as whatever else. So hopefully, if we've never met before, we'll get a chance to meet and I can be a resource for you. So thanks, guys. Again, I appreciate everything. Can't thank you enough for all you've done for me over the years.
Steve, thank you. That's it for Politics and Tactics tonight. Peter, take us out. It's a great day to be American. And Peter, thank you for stepping in for Mark Hahn and making this possible today.